Hello again, Dan Alasso, Making History. And this will be another description of a primary source, but we are getting closer to North America and to U.S. history now. So I am going to begin, in addition to reading these sources to you, I'm going to begin actually posting transcripts on my blog page at Substack. And so you can go there and read along. You can grab notes from there if you're interested, and I will also cite the original source of the document and the place where I got it, so that if you are interested in using it in any way, that will be available to you. So as I said, we're closing in on North America and the beginning of U.S. history. And although we think of the Spanish Empire as really conquering and colonizing Central and South America, the regions that we still call Latin America, the Spanish began their conquests more than a century before others, such as the French or the Dutch or the Swedish, or of course the English, had an opportunity to do so. And these conquests included attempts to explore North America and to find the types of sources of wealth there that they had been able to find in places like Mexico in the Aztec Empire or South America in the Inca Empire. And one of these attempts was that of Hernando De Soto, who lived from 1500 to 1542. He was a Castilian who was instrumental, actually, in Pizarro's conquest of Peru before he received permission from King Charles V, who was also, at the time, the Holy Roman Emperor, and that's why he refers to him as the Emperor in this text, to undertake a 4-year expedition into North America. De Soto brought with him 620 men and about 500 head of livestock, including over 200 horses and about 200 pigs. And many of these animals escaped and went feral in North America. De Soto landed in Florida and traveled across land that would later become Georgia, South and North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and Louisiana. In 1542, De Soto died of a fever in a native village called Guachoya, and the expedition then returned to Mexico City under Luis de Moscoso. Recently, historians have compared De Soto's account of his journey, during which he had written that the entire region that he explored was, quote, thickly settled with large towns. And they've compared this with the writings of people like the French aristocrat and explorer known as La Salle, who traveled down the Mississippi in 1670, about 130 years later. Where De Soto had seen fortified towns, La Salle saw nothing and no one. The entire region had been emptied, apparently by the diseases which accompanied De Soto and his men, and had returned to a virtual wilderness. The French explorer reported traveling hundreds of miles without passing a single village. Historians were relatively unaware, or at least didn't much pay attention to the fact until recently, that the American South was once heavily populated before the arrival of contagious Spanish explorers and conquistadors and missionaries. So this account is called From the Ocean to the Mississippi, 1539 to 1542. And the name of the original author is unknown. Some historians think it might have been Alvaro Fernandez, but in any case, he was a member of the expedition. And this was translated in 1609 by Richard Hakluyt. So once again, some of the language is a little bit archaic. It goes like this. Captain Soto was the son of a squire of Xerez of Badajoz. He went into the Spanish Indies when Peter Arias of Ahuila was governor of the West Indies. And there he was without anything else of his own, save his sword and target. And for his good qualities and valor, Peter Arias made him captain of a troop of horsemen. And by his commandment, went with Fernando Pizarro to the conquest of Peru, where, as many persons of credit reported, which were there present, as well as at the taking of Atahualpa, Lord of Peru, as at the assault of the city of Cusco, and in all other places where they found resistance, wheresoever he was present. He passed all other captains and principal persons. For which cause, besides his part of the treasure of Atahualpa, he had a good share, whereby in time he gathered 180,000 ducats together, with that which fell to his part, which he brought into Spain, whereof the emperor borrowed a certain part, which he repaid again with 60,000 reals of plate in the rent of the silks of Granada. And all the rest was delivered him in the contractation house of Seville. He took servants, to wit, a steward, a gentleman usher, pages, a gentleman of the horse, a chamberlain, lackeys, and all other offices that the house of a nobleman requireth. The emperor made him the governor of the Isle of Cuba, and adelantado, or president of Florida, with the title of Marquess of a certain part of the lands that he should conquer. On Sunday, the 18th of May, in the year of our Lord 1539, the adelantado, or president, departed from Havana in Cuba with his fleet, which were 9 vessels, 5 great ships, 2 caravels, and 2 brigantines. They sailed 7 days with a prosperous wind. On Friday, the 30th of May, they landed in Florida, 2 leagues from the town of an Indian lord called Vaita. He left Captain Calderon at the port with 30 horsemen and 70 footmen, with provision for 2 years, and himself with all the rest marched into the mainland, and came to the Paracosi, at whose town Baltazar de Gallegos was, and from thence with all his men took the way to Calais. And then there's a break, and it continues. This river, which was that which fell into the Rio Grande, or the Great River, that's the Mississippi, which passed by Pachaja and Aquixo, near unto the province of Guachoya, and the lord thereof came up the river in canoes to make war with him of Nilco. On his behalf there came an Indian to the governor, and said unto him that he was his servant, and prayed him so to hold him, and that within 2 days he would come to kiss his lordship's hands. And at the time appointed he came, with some of his principal Indians, which accompanied him. And with words of great offers and courtesy, he gave the governor a present of many mantles and deerskins. The governor gave him some other things in recompense, and honored him much. He asked him what towns there were down the river. He answered that he knew none other but his own, and on the other side of the river a province of a cacique called Quigalta. So he took his leave of the governor and went to his own town. Within a few days, the governor determined to go to Guachoya, to learn there whether the sea were near, or whether there were any habitation near where he might relieve his companies, while the brigantines were making, which he meant to send to the land of the Christians. As he passed the river of Nilco, there came in canoes Indians of Guachoya up the stream, and when they saw him, supposing that he came to seek to do them some hurt, they returned down the river and informed the cacique thereof, who with all his people, spoiling the town of all they could carry away, passed that night over to the other side of the Rio Grande, or the Great River. The governor sent a captain with 50 men in 6 canoes down the river, and went himself by land with the rest. He came to Guachoya on Sunday, the 17th of April. He lodged in the town of the cacique, which was enclosed about and seated a crossbow shot distant from the river. The governor fell into great dumps to see how hard it was to get to the sea, and worse, because his men and horses every day diminished, being without succor to sustain themselves in the country. And with that thought he fell sick, being evil handled with fevers, and was much aggrieved, that he was not in the case to pass presently the river, and to seek him to see if he could abate that pride of his, considering the river went now very strongly in those parts, for it was near half a league broad and 16 fathoms deep, and very furious, and ran with a great current. And on both sides there were many Indians. And his power was not now so great, but that he had need to help himself rather by flights than by force. The 21st of May, 1542, departed out of this life the valorous, virtuous, and valiant captain Don Hernando De Soto, governor of Cuba and Adelanto of Florida, whom fortune advanced, as it used to do others, that he might have the higher fall. He departed in such a place and at such a time, as in his sickness he had but little comfort, and the danger wherein all his people were of perishing in that country, which appeared before their eyes, was cause sufficient, why every one of them had need of comfort, and why they did not visit nor accompany him as they ought to have done. Louis de Moscoso determined to conceal his death from the Indians, because Hernando de Soto had made them believe that the Christians were immortal. As soon as he was dead, Louis de Moscoso commanded to put him secretly in a house, where he remained 3 days, and removing him from thence, commanded him to be buried in the night at one of the gates of the town, within the wall. And as the Indians had seen him sick and missed him, so they did suspect what might be. And passing by the place where he was buried, seeing the earth moved, they looked and spake one to another. Louis de Moscoso, understanding it, commanded him to be taken up by night, and to cast a great deal of sand into the mantles wherein he was winded up, wherein he was carried in a canoe and thrown into the midst of the river. So, apparently the body of De Soto was weighed down and dumped into the middle of the Mississippi River. And apparently the diseases that he and his men brought in the next century tore through the native population of southeastern America, so that by the time the French and the English arrived, the land had already been virtually depopulated. And I imagine we'll talk a great deal more about that when we get to that part of the story with the primary sources. But in the meantime, I hope you found that a little bit interesting. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you again very soon.